Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just let my team get assembled. Right off the bat, I just want to express my thanks and appreciation for our talented bargaining team for their hard work and dedication throughout this process. Last week was extremely busy. I was excited to welcome our new board members, and our team spent a lot of time getting them up to speed on all things CPS. We also spent a lot of time working on collecting resources and guidance for principals, staff, families to prepare them for the new presidential administration. The work is ongoing. I encourage everyone to visit cps.edu/new admin guidance. That's cps.edu/new admin guidance to explore the resources that are available for families, including help with immigration, services, training, workshops, and to help families understand their rights, guidance on applying for financial aid, and so much more. The main focus of today's briefing is going to be our district's financial reality. We've shared this information with many of you before and with CTU and our Board of Education. We want to share the most updated facts with you too. And we're also going to hear from our Chief Labor Negotiator, Miguel Peretta, our Chief Talent Officer, Ben Felton, and then our finance leaders, Chief Financial Officer, Miroslava Krug, and Budget Officer, Mike Zukowski. But I want to give you an overview first. We have communicated transparently and consistently for a long time about our district's financial situation. We've had presentations at board meetings. We produced our entanglement report that talked about what it would look like to untangle from the city's finances. We've had many public bargaining sessions. We presented to City Council, and we've answered questions from lawmakers. And we've had a public budget process every year. And we've been very consistent with our message. The district faces significant revenue challenges with the expiration of pandemic funding, and we can't afford to overextend ourselves in these labor negotiations. The Civic Federation report this morning confirms what I've been saying all along. That is why these negotiations have been so difficult. Because without additional revenue, we're going to have trouble protecting the gains we've already made before, and we want to make sure that that is our priority. So there's a few things I would like to that I want you to walk away from this briefing. So we've said this before, everybody. We've invested in our district based on need and added over 7,000 staff since 2019. Most of these positions were paid with federal pandemic aid, and now that the aid is running out, it will be difficult for us to continue these positions, much less pay for additional staff, so preserving these 7,000 positions remains our top priority. And right now, thanks to the TIP funding we received from the city, we have enough funding to pay for the cost of living increases for CTU and some minor costs associated with the CPA contract, but just for this year. However, given that the final TIF amount did not meet our original request, we do not have enough funding for additional staffing this year or to pay the MEABF pension payment that has been requested by the city. While we requested $484 million in TIF funding from the city, we only received $298 million. Let me repeat that. We made a formal request of $484 million from the city, and we only received $298. This included $97 million. That is what we get every year from TIF funding since the day of time, plus an additional $62 million for the SAIU contract. This leaves $139 million to cover a 4% COLA for the current year for CTU and costs associated with the CPA contract, and that's it. As we look at next year, as you know, you've been writing about this, we're going to start with a $500 million deficit, even without factoring those COLAs or additional staffing or costs related to our labor agreement or an additional pension payment for MEABF. These structural deficits persist in the $400 to $600 million range for the next 5 years. If we keep our COLA to 4%, my team believes that we have a fighting chance to balance the budget by advocating for additional revenue next year. This is the beginning of a new year, a new legislative session, and we're committed to working with our partners in government to secure additional revenue to help close next year's deficit. We are not and never have been a fully funded district. We need additional revenue. We have proven that what we can do when we have some additional revenue is as you look at our student academic growth, we're breaking records and leading the nation. And there is no big mythical pot of reserves to draw from. I know that people want to believe something different, But the reality, the district has a mere $66 million on cash on hand at the end of the fiscal year. And this is an incredibly small amount when you consider our $9.9 billion budget. It is important that we have this mutual understanding between the district, our labor partners, our board, and partners in government and the public. Having this understanding of the district's financial picture will allow us to move forward in a productive, sustainable way that ensures a contract that is in line with our values and ensures an equitable, rigorous, and joyful learning experience for our students. But if we overextend ourselves in the short term, our board will be forced to consider deficits, cuts, furloughs, and layoffs, which is a situation that everyone wants to avoid. I'll have more to say at the end of the presentation, but I'm going to turn things over to my team so we can go in greater detail about today's update, and I want to introduce our Chief Labor Officer, Miguel Peretta, to walk through the most recent developments.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miguel Peretta. Like CEO Martinez mentioned, I am the Chief Labor Relations Officer for the district. So I'm going to share just a quick updates before I turn it over to our Chief Talent Officer, Ben Felton. We continue to negotiate with CTU 5 days a week, demonstrating once again, our dedication to reaching a fair and reasonable tentative agreement with the CTU. Last week, we provided comprehensive responses to 3 of CTU's key priorities around academic freedom, assessment practices, and grading policies. We also initiated a committee to work on CTU's proposal to increase the elementary teacher planning time, showing once again our willingness to engage on this critical issue. Last Friday, we also received an updated document that CTU has labeled a roadmap to potential settlement, with which they identified about 70+ priorities. This might sound familiar because in December, they shared a similar document identifying 86 other priorities. In those priorities, CTU has updated their COLA proposals to 5% in years 1 and 2, and 4 to 5% in years 3 and 4, depending on CPI. They also reduced their request for additional planning time from 30 minutes to 20 minutes per day. While we acknowledge these adjustments, elevating 50 additional priorities as must-haves doesn't necessarily move us in the right direction. We spent all of December laser-focused on tackling the initial 86 priorities that CTU has identified as must-haves. And as I spoke to last time, we identified about 60+ of those priorities, and we were able to resolve most of them. Starting fresh with a new slate of priorities as proposed by CTU undermines the progress that we've made already. Yet, we remain committed to productive negotiations to hope to build on significant progress made rather than resetting the discussions so we can finalize an agreement that benefits all stakeholders. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Talent Officer to go over compensation and staffing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Peretta. So we know that raises and additional staffing requests have been 2 of the largest sticking points in these negotiations. So I wanted to talk briefly about both of those. First, let's just briefly talk compensation. So the eventual agreement with CTU will include significant boost in compensation for our educators, and we're really proud of that. They deserve salary increases. They deserve the most generous salary increases that the district can plausibly afford, which is what is on the table right now. CPS began negotiations this summer by offering the most generous cost of living adjustment since the mid-2000s, a minimum of 4% raise every year for 4 years, a total minimum salary increase of 16% for our educators. That's more than CTU got in the 2019 contract when the district's financial situation was considerably stronger. When factoring in regular step increases based on seniority, this increase for the individual educator will double to over 32% over 4 years for the majority of our educators. So let's look at what this means in real dollars. By the end of the 4-year agreement, the 3rd-year teacher today who's got a master's degree, that teacher's making $73,000 today. They'd be making $96,000 by the end of this agreement. For the 11th year teacher with a master's degree who's making $94,000 today, that they would be making $125,000 by the end of this agreement. For the salary for the 22nd year teacher with a master's degree who's making $116,000 today, that person would be making $140,000 by the end of the agreement. The offer would align with or exceed other contracts from around the city, labor contracts from around the city, including the contract that this team negotiated with the SEIU Local 73, who supports our support staff, school-based support staff. And remember, this isn't just about COLAs. CTU also has proposed additional step increases on their salary scale. So not only would there be cost of living adjustments, but there would also be CTU is also proposing that there would be additional steps on our salary scale, which would make educator compensation salaries even more expensive, and those proposals would cost tens of millions of dollars over the course of the contract. So given the serious fiscal constraints that our finance team is going to cover right now, even funding this 4% salary increase will not be easy for CPS. We have a lot of work to do to find room in the budget to be able to accommodate for these raises, but we're committed to doing it. But our educators deserve competitive compensation that rewards their talent. So furthermore, CPS's highly competitive salaries will help us continue to attract the most talented and qualified educators in the country, which is what I believe that we have. And finally, we know that this is a negotiation. We understand that CTU's job is to advocate for their members and that the preferred outcome is certainly to avoid a strike. But for those reasons, we'll continue to prioritize these landmark salary increases and proposals as a worthwhile investment. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about staffing. As CEO Martinez mentioned, we've added more than 7,000 staff to schools over the past 5 years. These additional staff have really driven our academic gains coming out of the pandemic, including more than 2,100 teachers, more than 3,500 special education support staff, hundreds of additional counselors, social workers, nurses, restorative justice coordinators, case managers, and more. I know we talk about these gains a lot in the abstract, but recently we've taken steps to show these gains on a school-by-school level. So for starters, please go to cps.edu/school staffing to see the allocation, to check out your neighborhood school and see how many more staff are in that building than were there 5 years ago. I can almost guarantee you that it's going to be a significant increase. And you can explore our new updated school profile pages on our website to show how these additional staff and investments are improving students' learning and their daily experience. So as we've mentioned, and this is critical, our top priority has been finding room in the budget for these existing staff positions. We do not want to be adding positions on one hand and having to lay off teachers on the other. It's the last thing that we want. We are committed to protecting our current staff and the staff that we've worked so hard to bring to the district over the past 5 years. And while we're continuing to work with our partners at the negotiating table, every new staff member that we add today does increase the likelihood that our board will have to consider cuts, furloughs, and even layoffs in the future. That's what we're working to avoid. And with that, I want to turn things over to the leaders of our finance team, Chief Financial Officer Miroslava Mejia-Krug and Chief Budget Officer Mike Sikowski. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Miroslava Mejia-Krug, Chief Financial Officer. What is the presentation? I'm going to go over some slides. Thank you. So there have been a lot of conversations about inequity in our buildings, and those inequities are created because we don't receive dedicated funds of capital from the state. So currently, we have $9.3 billion in outstanding debt. CPS primarily uses long-term debt in form of municipal bonds to pay for the annual capital budget and ongoing construction needs of the district. CPS have 34 series of long-term bonds, and we use $540 million of operating funds to pay for debt service. The fiscal year 2025 budget includes $870 million in debt service payments across various sources of funds. About 20% of our state aid and personal property replacement tax revenues are currently used to pay for the debt service. Next. So because we have so little reserve, we have to rely on tax anticipation notes or short-term debt to make payroll throughout most of the year. If you see this slide in 2023, 2024, and pretty much what is going on for 2025, 18 of the 26 payrolls that we issue here at CPS, we have to go to the banks to get the money to pay our employees and our vendors. Again, this is to demonstrate that we are at the end of our rope when it comes to revenues to fund new expenses. So typically, we want to have 30 days of cash on hand, which is about $600 million. In that $600 million, we require that we have it on hands at all times in a reserve. We only have $66 million of cash, which is where the arrow is showing, or 3 days of cash. Just think about 3 days of cash, $66 million, and our operating budget is over $8 billion. So we keep hearing that the district have a fund balance of $1.1 billion, which is true. We have a paper fund balance of $1.1 million. And it is effectively unavailable to draw on because it is already being used by the district during the year to cover short-term borrowing used to bridge gap between when our property taxes, our PPRT, our TIS funds, and all the revenues that we receive come in. It is inaccurate to assert that the district have $1 billion fund balance available for us. Just think about it. If we, CPS, have $1 billion sitting on the bank, why are we required to issue $1 billion in TANs to pay our employees? It also does not represent the amount of cash actually available at the end of the fiscal year because of a decision made on 2025 to shift the time period to report revenues from 30 to 60 days after the fiscal year end. As I said, as of June 30, the district has only 3 days of cash of $66 million. So that change on accounting period created a paper, what we call it, a paper fund balance at the end of the year. It makes our fund balance look better at the end of the year. If you wouldn't have done that, our fund balance would equal $66 million. CPS operating reserve alone are not sufficient to provide enough cash for an $8 billion. And because of this, the district relies on a short-term borrowing to fund cash flow needs throughout through short-term tax anticipation notes. If CPS have a fully funded fund balance, again, of $1 billion, the district will not have to issue short-term debt to pay employees and our vendors. I am going to turn it over to Mike Sitoski, our Chief Budget Officer.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Mike Sudkowski. I'm the Chief Budget Officer for Chicago Public Schools. One thing before I start, I do want to note that the accounting change that Chief Mejia Krug mentioned was 2015, not 2025. So just to be clear on that. Yeah. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So I want to talk a bit today about our financial picture, both for this year and for the next 5 years for the district in light of where we're at in terms of funding versus our costs that we have. First, for FY25, for the board to approve any additional costs this fiscal year, the board will need to approve an amended budget with revenue to cover these costs. The final budget approved by the city in December includes $298 million of TIF surplus funding for CPS. Our budget, passed by our board unanimously in July, includes $159 million to cover base funding for CPS and to cover the cost of the collective bargaining agreement with SEIU Local 73 that was ratified in May. This $159 million is already included in our budget that was passed in July. This leaves $139 million for CPS to cover any additional costs in FY25 that need to be included in an amended budget. This $139 million would allow for CPS to fund year one of our proposals to CTU if no other pending costs are committed. As the CEO said, this does not include $175 million for the Municipal Employees Annuity and Benefit Fund, also known as MEABF. And to be fair, we asked the city for $484 million in TIF revenue, and we received the $298 million. Had we received the full TIF request, we would be able to cover both the year one cost of our proposal to the teachers union and the MEABF payment. Now looking forward at 2026 and beyond, this year our ESSER funding ran out. This meant that we had to find $500 million in reductions and efficiencies within our budget to make ends meet in the budget that was approved in July. The good news is that we were able to do it successfully. The bad news is we've picked most, if not all, of the low-hanging fruit off of the tree. So some of these options won't be available as we enter next year's budget process. And when we look down the road, the district still faces significant structural budget challenges in future years that we've talked about now for years. Our FY 2026 budget deficit would be at least $500 million before factoring in the cost of new collective bargaining agreements. And as you see on this slide, these deficits grow to over $750 million next year and over $900 million for 4 straight years due to our proposed COLA alone. This is why it's important for the future of our district to reach an agreement that is both fair and financially sustainable. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to CEO Martinez to conclude.
Thank you, Mike. I want to thank again our finance team who's been doing a remarkable job moving heaven and earth to try to preserve the investments we made at the school level. If you remember, even this last year, as difficult as our budget was, we were able to actually even increase our schools based on need. So I want to address a few more things before we open it up to Q&A. First of all, $1.1 billion in reserves. That notion is flat out not true. It is based on a snapshot in time, not fully accounting for revenues and expenses in the fiscal year. And I can let my team go into more detail in Q&A, but the reality is we have $66 million of cash on hand, and that's 3 days of operating revenue, as you heard our CFO. If we had $1.1 billion in reserves sitting in the bank, we would not be taking out a loan of over $1 billion in tax anticipation loans to make payroll while we're waiting for property taxes to come in. We would not be fretting about how we're going to balance next year's budget. We have $1 billion in the bank. And personally, I would not have risked the job that I love, in the district that I love, in the city that I love, my home city, if we had massive reserves that we could have solved all these budget issues. There is no mythical pot of gold, so I hope we can put this to bed. Next, I want to talk about the pension payment, MEABF. I want to thank CTU President Stacey Davis Gates for coming out and saying that the city should once again pick up this pension obligation. This pension payment has been traditionally the city's responsibility for a century. Everybody, for a century, for over 100 years. When the previous mayor moved this payment onto CPS's books, we were able to do it because of the ESSER flexibility. But now we're in a different budget environment. I will add that President Davis Gates' position is consistent with CTU's long-standing position on this issue. Her predecessor, Jesse Sharkey, agreed that it was ripping off the district, and he had these direct quotes. It's a despicable shell game, a shameful scheme to balance the city budget in an election year on the backs of CPS students. President Davis Gates' position is also consistent with the mayor's own transition report, which says on page 74 that the $175 million CPS pension payment should not be given back, that money should not be taken away from CPS. We made this clear with the city when we made our request for the $484 million in TIF funding. So I'm hopeful that now we're all on the same page when it comes to our pension payment, which again, The board approved the budget without it. And then finally, I want to underscore the point in state law that is very clear that we have to have a balanced budget and that loans cannot be counted as revenue to balance that budget. We're allowed to take out loans for capital improvements, and our CFO shared with you the number of loans we have. We're allowed to take out tax anticipation loans to make payroll because tax revenue from the county we're still waiting for that revenue. But immediately, as soon as it's paid, that's spent. We have to pay it back. It truly is a payday loan. We're allowed to create revenue by refinancing our debt, but we've already done that several times to the point that there's very little refinancing that we can do. We're not allowed to take out loans and to pretend that it's sustainable revenue. Let me repeat that. We are not allowed by law to take out loans and pretend it's sustainable revenue. It would be like us going to the bank and taking out a loan for paying our groceries or the next car payment. The bank would tell you, buy chicken instead of steak, drive a Ford instead of a BMW. Borrowing money for daily essentials does not work when you're dealing with a family budget, and it does not work when you're dealing with our taxpayers' money. That is why the state law is very clear about this. In conclusion, I want to underscore the points that we made today. Our top priority is to preserve our 7,000 positions that we have read. These people are working in our schools. Our schools have more people, and by the way, it's in the schools that have the greatest need. This was a common vision that we all had, the board, the mayor, our team. And every cost that we take on will increase the likelihood that our board will be forced to consider furloughs, cuts, and layoffs, which we're trying to avoid. We're not holding the line in these negotiations because we want to shortchange our kids. We're doing it because we have to protect the long-term health of our district, or we will get hit with higher interest rates on debt service. It will continue to eat up a larger portion of our interest expense. We're already the second largest junk bond producer in the country, second only to Puerto Rico. This is a $9.9 billion district, and we're paying $817 million in debt service alone, and most of it is interest. I'm 100% committed to working with our officials at every level of government to bring in more revenue, and I'm looking forward to continuing these conversations with Springfield as we embark the new legislative session. I've been consistent in arguing that we are not a fully funded district and that our students deserve more. But it is the CEO's job to bring the budget in balance every year. And we cannot make these decisions based on the revenue we wish we had. I wish that was the world we were in. We have to make decisions on the revenues we have today. And with that, we're open to questions. Sarah.
I know you may not be here next year, but what do you think the school district should do to, forget the CTU contract? What do we do about these deficits to protect those?
So I've been very consistent, Sarah, on this issue. First of all, our taxpayers are tired of taxes and fees. I mean, they're tired. And what's very frustrating to me is when you have a district which already has lost its federal funding, we have our inequities with the state, which we've always talked about, and that's an ongoing process. By the way, at least the state is trying, right? And they're open about it. Here we have local revenues, $19 billion, that our taxpayers are getting taxed on, and we have no access to that. It produces $600 million alone just for CPS. It has created balances in the bank of over $3 billion. The district cannot have all those inequities happening at once. And these are revenues that are already being collected. Taxpayers are already paying it. We've never allowed a structural deficit to get too big because we knew these revenues were there. Now, again, I've said this before. I'm a Chicago kid. I know what TIFs have done for our city. But these TIFs were supposed to expire after 23 years. These TIFs started everybody in the 80s. And look, they've done wonderful things. It's time to release those TIFs. Now, it's not going to happen all at once. And by the way, these are ongoing revenues I'm talking about. I'm talking that are collected every single year. The $3 billion they have in the bank, they can use that to smooth it out over the next several years. And so, again, I thought this was an easy ask. I thought everybody was aligned with this. The board that resigned was aligned with this. We had a vision of fully funding our schools. We had a mechanism. We're showing the progress. And yet, here we are. Yes, sir.
CEO, let me ask you two questions here. Let's put the CPS student looking at this, hearing your words saying that you have 3 days of operational cash funds, what do you say to that parent who is questioning whether or not to even leave their child in this district today?
So what I want to say is, first of all, I want to acknowledge the hard work of our staff. We are making it work. Is it ideal? It is not. We have inherited this from many years. And by the way, this happened during this period of around 2015, 2018, where they changed the accounting rules to cover up the negative fund balances, where we went into debt, the things that are being discussed today. And so what I would tell parents first, this is why we are fighting so hard to maintain the investments we have, to help build up our finances. And we have existing revenues today. We're not asking parents to pay more. We're saying, let's look at these tips, let's look at these revenues, and by the way, let's continue to work with our state, because at least the state is acknowledging their shortfall and they're trying to address it.
My second question, just for clarification, you talk about the 7,000 positions that you have, that you're trying to save. Of those 7,000 positions, how many of them are actually members of the CTU? Because it begs the question is, if you're asked, if they're very adamant about they want more members, and you're saying we're going to have to lay people off, are they understanding that these would be their members or these non-CTU members?
So I don't have the number off of the top of my head. I think, over 2,000 of them are teachers, which are certainly CTU members. My guess is thousands of the others are also CTU members. So yes, the teachers union is well aware that our concern is, our top priority has been protecting the employees that we have, and they are well aware, we have made them aware that many of the employees who would be at risk in a situation where we overextended ourselves with staffing demands or staffing commitments would be CTU members, yes.
Sí, sí. The question is, what is our priority today? La prioridad ahorita estamos mirando que nuestros niños están creciendo académicamente. Estamos mirando que tenemos más fondos en nuestras escuelas, más maestros, y estamos enseñando éxito. Y también sabemos que estas inversiones los tenemos que proteger. Al mismo tiempo, estamos dando a nuestros maestros un aumento que los va a quedar, que sean los más altos en el país de pago. Y eso es algo muy, muy importante porque queremos valorar, we want to value nuestros maestros. So I just said, everyone, that our priority is, and will continue to be, to protect the investments we have because we're showing that they're working. And that includes continuing to compensate our teachers, and we want to keep them at the top of the pay scale because, again, that is part of our strategy.
So if you can answer, this is Spanish and in English.
Yeah.
So you say something related with rates, or what will be the role of the CPS in this new administration?
So say that again, I'm sorry.
What will be the role of CPS of schools in case of any rates around, schools here in Chicago?
Let me say rates, I'm sorry. Oh, rates, I'm sorry, disculpe. Ok, sí. No, mandamos información para proteger a nuestros niños. Y nosotros sabemos que tenemos muchas organizaciones aquí en Chicago que vamos a trabajar juntos con ellos para que nuestros padres sepan sus derechos. Siempre vamos a proteger los niños que están en nuestras escuelas. Nunca vamos a dejar algo que les pase a nuestros niños. Y siempre vamos a trabajar con las organizaciones y nuestros padres porque queremos que sepan sus derechos. I said, in terms of rates, we're always going to protect our children in our schools. Mandamos mucha información que no nomás enseña lo que tenemos nosotros en nuestros policies, pero también las organizaciones que estamos trabajando para entrenar los padres y estamos entrenando también a nuestros empleados. So I said, we have partnered with many organizations who not only are helping to retrain our staff, but also train our parents around their rights, and we will continue to be committed to that. Gracias, señor. Other questions? Well, again, everybody, oh, yes.
So the Civic Federation report this morning confirms what you've been saying all along since the beginning of this conference. That report made recommendation for cuts, right, which you proposed in their conference just a few minutes before this. So what other operational cuts are you considering to solve this if the state can't
Well, as always, when we balance this year's budget, we went and looked at where we could find efficiencies, and that's always going to be our commitment. Look, I will never say that we can't find efficiencies. A district this large, we always can. The challenge that we have is we're trying to hold multiple realities together. We're not closing schools. That is something that is against my value system, but I also know we have very under-enrolled schools. That's pointed out very clearly in the Federation report. We're trying to invest in those schools to see if we can grow enrollment. And we're seeing some early signs, for example, what's happening at Collins High School, where our freshmen now are making up half of the enrollment, and that's with investments we're making for a STEAM Academy. But it's very, very early on. At the same time, we're still struggling to make sure that we can keep up with, other needs and demands, including our special needs students. So we will always look for efficiencies, but we've always said this very clearly. Where there is no misalignment is the fact that our district is not fully resourced, that our children still have significant needs that we're not meeting. We've always said that. And the investments we made were really the first time and we did it over multiple years, we said, let's really show our schools and parents what it could look like if we start seeing real funding, making sure everybody has access to the arts, smaller class sizes in our neediest schools. Again, I invite any of you, go to our schools, go see them. Go see where the small classes are at. Do we still have large class sizes? We do in magnet schools. So when people talk about reduced class size, guess what? Those are the schools. Now look, I don't like having, magnet schools with with larger class sizes, but again, we're talking about equity. We're talking about need. That was the common vision that was set from the very beginning. And so for me, I still think it's a revenue issue. That is why you're going to continue to hear me beat that drum. You have TIF revenues now. They're being paid. If we would have gotten a request for TIF revenues, they wouldn't even have to even consider a tax increase. Because remember, a portion of those revenues also go to the city. So I think first, again, our priority is protecting what we're investing in today. And that includes, by the way, our compensation proposals we're making because we want to stay competitive. I appreciate the direction the city's going. I actually do. And we've actually seen more transparency with TIFs than we've seen in previous administrations. So I want to call that out. The misalignment that we have today. When you hear, I believe in fully resourcing schools. I don't believe in cutting schools, right? You hear that consistently. But yet, here is $1.2 billion in TIF revenue being collected, which half of that, 52 cents on the dollar, would be going to CPS. And so I appreciate the long-term schedule for release, but it's not fast enough. Because all I hear today is, I'm not going to support any cuts. I want schools fully resourced. I want a leader who's going to stand up for that. Here's the leader standing up for it. And so again, we have to, stop talking in contradictions. And so for me, not fast enough, Mila. And the other thing is we need to educate our taxpayers because they don't understand this. They're paying their tax bills thinking, oh, it's going to CPS. Oh, it's going to the city. It's going to the park district. Parents are standing for hours to sign up their kids for park programs. They don't understand why is it that the parks can't offer more programs? Well, guess what? $19 billion in property taxes are being, and property tax values are being, shielded away from the taxing bodies, CPS being the biggest one, but we're not the only one, including the city itself. So that is a story, everyone, that needs to be told over and over and over again. And again, it's not that I don't see the value of the TIFs, but we've seen the value of the TIFs, everybody. It is time to release those TIFs for our children. So what I can tell you about central office, the additions we have made have mostly been staff that are directly supporting schools. And so in many cases, what we've seen is either, for example, when we were outsourcing, and when I came to the district, one of the things that alarmed me is the number of vendor contracts that we had. And we were outsourcing all of, major functions. And I said, this is not going to be healthy for the district, because then then we become victims of those outside providers. And so any investments we made, Sarah, have been very, very methodical to make sure that it's individuals that are supporting the schools directly, individuals that are supporting programming that's also supporting the schools. But Bogdan, I don't know if you want to add anything, but that's what it's really been. And we've been very, very meticulous about making sure that any investment we make, it's actually saving money at the school level, because when the schools are having to do everything themselves, then you have 600 schools trying to figure this out versus we can do something centrally. Yeah.
Hi. Clearly, the report came out today. I'm going to have to comb through the numbers. But what I have noticed very often is happening with these reports around central office positions. Please know that many of the positions that are actually in schools are budgeted within departments in central office. To give you some examples, our college and career specialists, they're reflected in our budgets as part of the central office departments, but they actually are serving kids in schools. Same is true for all of our clinicians, social workers, speech pathologists, and so many of them. So very often we hear that narrative, central office bloated, I guess bureaucracy in central office, but most of these positions are actually in schools, and this is how some of our budgets are working out, but happy to follow up with you with more detailed responses.
Well, the final question I have is, so would you say that you just disagree with the Civic Federation report? I mean,
In what way, sir?
agree that there should not, you do not think that there should, because it comes out pretty strongly that they say that there needs to be efficiencies and start warning if there's not.
So I think, Sarah, it's not that we disagree. I want to make sure, though, that we understand, first of all, that we have a revenue shortfall and our children have a lot of needs, and this district has always been underfunded. We're a little bit better because of ESSER, but now those funds are gone. So I want to recognize that. They confirmed the fact that we don't have any reserves to be able to use, so they were very clear about that. I think the challenge we know this is a philosophical, if you want to say maybe slight difference, which is I really believe in investing. When I look at Austin and I see under-enrolled schools, especially at the high school level, and I always have to remind everybody, if every child that lives in Austin went to their high school in Austin, we'd be overcrowded. And so for me, it's just not as simple as take all these schools that are under-enrolled. I have to ask the question, is there a possibility for us to make those schools more attractive to the children? And at the same time, I also want to uphold, it's not just schools. It's how do we make the children feel safe in their own community, which is well beyond us. That is, that really brings into the city. And so I'm not going to give up on that concept. It doesn't mean that we still shouldn't find efficiencies. Thank you, everyone.